The FIA has just handed Oscar Piastri a 10-second penalty after his incident with Antonelli and Leclerc, and McLaren is furious. That penalty didn't just ruin his Brazilian Grand Prix, it could cost him the World Championship. Inside McLaren, pressure is boiling and sources suggest the garage is now split over how much support Piastri should receive. With 3 races to go, and Lando Norris leading the standings, this controversial decision might decide who walks away with the crown. The 2025 Brazilian Grand Prix was supposed to be another page in Oscar Piastri's title charge, a stage to reinforce his presence in McLaren's historic season. But just 6 laps into the race, it all changed. A sudden move under braking by Kimi Antonelli, a tight entry into Turn 1, and a slight but costly collision led to chaos. Charles Leclerc's Ferrari was taken out in the aftermath. And before McLaren could even provide data to defend their driver, the FIA acted, delivering a 10-second penalty to Piastri that would rewrite the outcome of his weekend. What followed wasn't just a race lost, it was a momentum shift. Piastri had qualified strongly, managed his tires well through the sprint, and looked sharp in the early laps. He was exactly where he needed to be to close the gap to teammate Lando Norris in the championship. But the penalty forced McLaren into damage control. A new race strategy, sacrificed track position, and a psychological gut punch at the worst possible time. For a driver still within reach of a maiden title, it was a cruel twist delivered not by misjudgment behind the wheel, but by the judgment of the stewards. Inside the McLaren garage, tension was instant. Andrea Stella kept the team focused, but behind the scenes, the decision was met with disbelief. Engineers analyzed the telemetry. Piastri's inputs were clean. The gap existed. Antonelli moved late. And yet, no further footage or clarification was requested before the stewards handed out what many now believe to be one of the most controversial penalties of the season. Piastri, composed on the radio, simply asked, "What was I supposed to do there?" It was a fair question, and one that still doesn't have a satisfying answer. But what elevates this story beyond a racing incident is what's happening off the track. As soon as the penalty was confirmed, internal pressure inside McLaren began to climb. With both Norris and Piastri fighting for the championship, every strategic call, every PR statement, every garage order carries twice the weight. The team must now navigate not just car development and race strategy, but the human balance between 2 drivers on a collision course, one leading the championship, the other carrying the emotional fallout of FIA injustice. The timing couldn't be worse. With 3 races left, Las Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi, Piastri trails Norris by 24 points. That gap might seem manageable, but it's enough to shift control of the title fight firmly into Lando's hands. Had the FIA not issued the penalty, Piastri could have finished P2, closing the gap to within 16 or even less. Instead, the team has to regroup around a driver who has every reason to feel aggrieved, yet no room for emotional error. It's a razor's edge, and the wrong move internally could fracture the unity that's defined McLaren's resurgence. The problem began at the very heart of Interlagos Turn 1 on lap 6, just after a safety car restart. Oscar Piastri, who had been managing his tire wear carefully and staying close to the lead pack, spotted an opening on the inside of Kimi Antonelli. Antonelli, still settling into his first season at Mercedes, made a slight defensive move under braking, subtle, but significant. Piastri was already committed. The gap was there. He took it, cleanly. But as the corner tightened, Antonelli drifted left, and contact was inevitable. The real damage came in the chain reaction. The Mercedes bounced sideways into the racing line, and Charles Leclerc, who had gone around the outside, became the unintended victim. With nowhere to go, the Ferrari driver was launched over debris and into the barriers. His race ended instantly. The yellow flags flew. In the midst of the confusion, the stewards made a rapid decision, a 10-second time penalty for Piastri, blamed for causing a collision. The call stunned fans, analysts, and even rival engineers who had access to the telemetry. That telemetry later showed what McLaren had argued from the start: Piastri's braking was controlled, his steering input smooth, and the space he entered was legitimate. This wasn't reckless. It was decisive. It was racing. And while the situation escalated quickly with Leclerc's retirement, the cause was far from one-sided. Even Mercedes' post-race analysis admitted Antonelli may have reacted too late. But by then, the damage was done. Piastri's race was compromised not by a mistake on track, but by a rush to judgment off it. What's worse, the timing of the decision prevented McLaren from submitting counter-evidence before the ruling was enforced. Their race engineers had barely begun to process the data before the 10-second penalty was locked in. That's critical, because in F1, the difference between P2 and P5 is often not just about pace, it's about where you pit, what traffic you rejoin into, and whether you're forced to extend or shorten stints. For Piastri, this single call meant abandoning a strategy that was working and resetting the race with a heavy disadvantage. Internally, this created a serious problem for McLaren. Lando Norris was leading the race. Piastri, with the penalty, was suddenly off strategy and losing time. The team was now forced to split their resources, support Norris's push for the win, while also managing a frustrated driver who had every reason to question the fairness of the system. The political weight of handling two title-contending drivers under one roof had arrived, and this time, not because of a mistake from either driver, but from the governing body. Piastri's response was calm. No radio outburst. No finger-pointing. Just quiet frustration and focus. He served the penalty, recalibrated his drive, and still brought the car home in fifth. But make no mistake, the mental impact of knowing the call was wrong and that it cost him 8 or more championship points lingers. It's not just a matter of lost ground. It's a matter of trust. And when the trust between drivers, teams, and stewards begins to fracture, the entire ecosystem of competitive fairness starts to tremble. The moment the 10-second penalty was confirmed, McLaren's pit wall had to flip the strategy board upside down. Oscar Piastri, who had been running on a perfect tire management plan for a late undercut, was now a target for traffic and time loss. Extending his stint was no longer optional, it was essential. They needed clear air. They needed a slow safety car. And above all, they needed Piastri to drive a race that was aggressive in pace but clean enough to avoid compounding the damage. McLaren kept him out longer than initially planned, stretching the first stint by 4 additional laps. It was a calculated risk. Running longer risked rear degradation, especially through the twisty middle sector of Interlagos, where balance under load is key. But Piastri's touch on the throttle was smooth, his braking distribution was flawless, and he kept deltas well within the team's predictive models. Behind the scenes, engineers were adjusting tire degradation maps on the fly, and Piastri was hitting every single window. When he finally pitted, the stop was surgical. No mistakes. Piastri served his penalty, rejoined in traffic, and instantly found himself in a race of recovery. But here's where his composure mattered most. Drivers in his position often overdrive, pushing too hard too early, overheating tires, losing the rear. But Oscar delivered a masterclass in patient aggression. He waited for DRS windows. He managed energy deployment lap by lap. And one by one, he cleared the mid-pack runners with the kind of control usually seen in multi-time champions. The damage to his front wing from the Antonelli contact had introduced a small balance issue. McLaren's data suggested a slight understeer bias, especially in the low-speed exits. That limited how late he could rotate the car in turns 10 and 12, crucial for overtaking setup down the pit straight. But Oscar adapted. He adjusted entry angles and opened the wheel slightly earlier to stabilize rotation. These aren't just instincts, they're skills that define great drivers. He minimized the damage, controlled his race, and brought the car home P5. That finish doesn't tell the full story. What could have been 18 points and a podium finish was slashed to 10. But within the team, the drive was recognized for what it really was, proof of leadership under fire. Piastri had the right to be angry. He had the right to question strategy. But instead, he delivered a disciplined performance that protected his championship position and kept McLaren in the fight. Not just for the driver title, but for the internal balance of power. In the context of 2025, this race could be remembered not just for the points lost, but for the strength Piastri showed in adversity. He raced smart. He raced hard. And most importantly, he raced with the awareness that every move, every comment, every decision mattered, not just for the moment, but for the legacy he's building. With 3 races to go, the fight is far from over. But McLaren now knows they have 2 drivers capable of carrying the title. And for Piastri, that truth might matter more than a single trophy. Championships are rarely won on pure speed alone. They're shaped by moments of judgment and misjudgment. The 10-second penalty given to Oscar Piastri in Brazil has already shifted the trajectory of this title fight. With 3 races left, Lando Norris leads the championship with 390 points, while Piastri sits second with 366. That 24-point gap is just wide enough to give Norris breathing room, but tight enough that one mistake, one DNF, or one moment of brilliance could flip everything. Brazil could have closed the gap, instead, it widened it. If Piastri had finished second in Brazil, which McLaren's strategy models suggest he could have without the penalty, he would have scored 18 points instead of 10. That would have slashed the gap to just 16. And in a season where the difference between a win and P2 is only 7 points, that margin is critical. It's the difference between being in control and being on the edge. Now, Piastri needs perfection and he needs Norris to falter. The margin for error has disappeared. And the pressure has tripled. Inside McLaren, the emotional dynamic has changed. Norris remains the calm, consistent frontrunner, the face of the team's long-term project. But Piastri's drive in Brazil, combined with the FIA's controversial handling, has made him the story. He's no longer the quiet number two. He's the driver that people feel was wronged. That matters. It changes fan perception. It changes media pressure. And most importantly, it shifts how engineers and strategists allocate attention in the final races. When one driver has momentum and moral support, it can tilt balance in ways data alone cannot explain. Then there's the credibility of the FIA. This incident has sparked broader concerns not just at McLaren, but across the paddock. If a driver can be penalized mid-race without full evidence review, only to be apologized to after the fact, what does that say about consistency? What does that say about fairness? Teams invest millions in simulation tools, decision trees, and predictive models, all rendered meaningless if decisions are made reactively, rather than correctly. And for Piastri, this isn't just about a wrong call. It's about what that call cost him at a pivotal point in his career.